right. It's really a beautiful day, and I'm really grateful that Katie Lee is here with me today. We're going to talk about oral health and wellness as an amazing dentist and one of the top 40 under 40 dentists, and a speaker, an entrepreneur, a writer, and many more things. And we're going to have a great time to share her ideas on health and wellness. Katie, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. This is women's health is one of my favorite topics to talk about. So really excited for our conversation today.
Well, as an OBGYN, I went into it because we're particularly connected to women and their health, and found it quite fascinating through the pregnancy and whole life experience. And tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into dentistry and where you're from, and how you got on this crazy, beautiful journey.
Sure. So I'm from a small town in central Illinois. Originally, I live in Aurora, Colorado now, but grew up in a farm town in Illinois and grew up riding four-wheelers.
Cool.
And July 5th, 1998, we had just gotten back from being at the lake all day, went for a ride on a four-wheeler and crashed headfirst into a telephone pole, going about 35 miles an hour, and did not have a helmet on.
Whew.
Luckily I survived, with or without brain damage. That's kind of TBD day by day. But I ended up breaking every bone in my face from my eyebrows down. I lost a bunch of teeth. I had my lip torn off. I got off the four-wheeler and walked to a neighbor's house, asked them to take me to the hospital, not to call an ambulance. And I don't remember the day, don't remember the crash. Next thing I know, I woke up about 5 days later in the hospital. I had a cast on my wrist and my jaws were wired shut. And ended up taking about 4 years and 9 reconstructive facial surgeries to repair my face and my jaw. So I had my jaw wired shut for 8 weeks. And, as you can imagine, when you run into a telephone pole face first, you break a lot of teeth. But that night in the hospital, because I was in such critical condition, the surgeons wired my jaw shut immediately because they just needed to stabilize everything. And so they wired everything shut. Things were broken and misplaced and, not ideal for oral health. And so the next 8 weeks, trying to eat with your jaws wired shut, I survived off of, boxed mashed potatoes, not even the real stuff, boxed mashed potatoes, pudding, Jell-O, ice cream. And so just became very severely malnourished. Liver started shutting down, enzymes spiked, kidneys started shutting down, became very emaciated and malnourished. So I learned at a very young age just how much your mouth affects your overall health. And when I got my wires off 8 weeks later, my jaw was actually fused shut. So I had to go another 4 years not being able to open my mouth wide enough to put a toothbrush in. And, I just told you what my diet consisted of. So it was like that for the next 4 years. And so that just wreaked havoc on my teeth. So if you can name a dental procedure, I've probably had it done. But yeah, that just really taught me that your oral health is so crucial to your overall health. And I was, suffering from the systemic effects of poor oral health for a long time. And, what it does to you mentally and emotionally as a teenager in high school, just trying to fit in with everyone and you're missing a bunch of front teeth. So that got me into dentistry initially. And then over time, pretty quickly, I actually started venturing more into the mouth-body connection and oral systemic health. And then through my own journey with fertility, kind of went into oral health and fertility as well.
And tell us a little bit about how you brought that connection, because obviously you suffered. But from what I experience in standard medicine and reproductive medicine, there isn't much of a discussion about oral health, nor the food we eat and its connection to the diseases. So tell us a little bit about how you got to that part of it and how you think about it today and how you share it.
Yeah. So I just started noticing in my practice when patients would come in, I would never see a patient that had a healthy mouth and then also not have any kind of systemic diseases, and vice versa. If someone came in with systemic disease, and they were unhealthy, their mouth was also unhealthy. So I just very quickly saw this association between how many diseases they had and whether or not they were controlled and whether or not their mouth was healthy. And so that just really got me thinking, like, I wonder if we try and improve the health of the mouth, if their systemic disease will improve. And, at first it was anecdotal because a lot of research wasn't really out there about this, around 2010 when I first started practicing. And then it just started happening more and more. Heart attack patients, heart disease patients, diabetic patients, fertility patients, they would come in and I would treat them. And I really focused on the oral microbiome. That was a
Mhm.
really big key
Hmm.
piece. So I would look at their microbiome. I would look at the bacteria and how it affects, distant organ systems. I would look at inflammatory markers, because again, most diseases are caused by inflammation, not genes. And so I started looking at it that way. And then over time, just trying to figure out how else can we better help our patients. And so that's when we started bringing in, nutrition and alternative modalities of care, just to try and treat the person as a whole being and not just, only focusing on the mouth, which I think is what, medicine in the US really does today.
So the clients or patients you met with, how open were they, and are they in kind of beginning to open up to this connection in oral hygiene, the microbiome, and their nutrition? And how would you share that?
Yeah, it's definitely been like a dynamic experience over time. At first when I'm talking to them about, their gums bleeding or, maybe they have abscesses on their teeth or cavities or they have an airway issue, they would say, well, my gums have always bled. That's just how I've always been. My last dentist didn't say that there was anything wrong. And I was, with him or her for 25 years. So I would say initially people thought I was probably, a bit crazy, and or maybe overdiagnosing, right? I got that a lot of, oh, you just want my money. This isn't a real thing. But what was really critical for me was to bring in actual technologies into the practice that I could test the patients with and then say, hey, look, this isn't just me telling you, there's actual test results, which is what you do when you go to a doctor, right? If you have any kind of symptoms or they're noticing something, they're going to, order a gamut of tests before they give you a diagnosis. And what's unique about dentistry is up until the, past couple years, we really haven't had a whole lot of that. Um, it's just been based off of what the dentist sees, their symptoms, and then they kind of give you the diagnosis of their opinion, right? So once those testing technologies came out, that was really helpful for me in convincing patients and other practitioners that I was working with that there was an issue going on that we needed to pay attention to.
So tell us a little bit about the microbiome and my experience. I didn't go to the dentist until I was like about 9 or 10. I had about 9 or 10 cavities. I loved the dentist at the time because I got nitrates, and like, oh, this is great.
Yeah.
And so for years I suffered with gum bleeding, and it wasn't until when I was in my 40s, 50s when I found keto paleo and then actually carnivore at 55 that suddenly I didn't have any more gum bleeding, and the connection for me in the oral hygiene was quite amazing. So, what type of tests are there that people can look towards, and what are some of the microbes do you think are more troublesome than others?
Absolutely. So there's two things that we need to pay attention to when we're thinking about the mouth and bleeding gums and systemic disease. One is the actual microbiome. So what is the state of the microbiome in the mouth? Not only do we not want bad pathogens, but we also want to make sure we have a plentiful amount of good pathogens. We also want to make sure we have, a lot of diversity as well. That's super important. So we look at the microbiome. And then the other thing is we have to look at the patient's systemic inflammatory susceptibility to disease because, between you and I, we could have very similar microbiomes if you look at us on paper, but the clinical signs and symptoms and what it's doing to the mouth and the rest of the body could be completely different based on our systemic inflammatory response. So inflammatory response is very critical when we're looking at bleeding gums and, gum inflammation. So in terms of testing, there's a lot of salivary tests on the market. They're just spit tests, which is fantastic. So you don't even have to have a needle. You swish and spit into the tube, and we can get a whole microbiome profile on a patient. And that's really important because it tells us what bugs are present, it tells us the level that they're present. It can tell us what systemic organ systems they're affecting, but then it also tells us how to best treat those specific microbes. And what's really interesting is that, for decades, dentists and hygienists have only been rendering like a one size fits all type of treatment for bleeding gums or periodontal disease. But what we know from doing these microbiome tests is that half of all the pathogens that we test for are actually resistant to that type of treatment. So it's no wonder why patients say my gums, are bleeding. They've always bled. Well, it's because we've been giving you the wrong treatment. Granted, we didn't know better because we didn't have these tests in the past, but we know better now. And so it's important to do those tests. And then for the inflammatory markers, you can get, we can measure IL-6 gene mutation through the saliva right now, which is great. There's going to be other tests coming out that will actually measure the quantity of IL-6, which is a genetic marker for inflammation. And CRP is coming out, those measurements. But the one that I really like, and I talk about in the book all the time, is a biomarker called MMP8. MMP8 is a collagenase enzyme, which is just a big fancy word for it acts like a scissor in the body, and it starts to cut down and break down all of our collagen. So when someone talks about leaky gut is caused by this MMP8 enzyme. And so there's no coincidence there that the same enzyme that causes leaky gut also causes your gum tissue to break down. So we refer to gum disease or gingivitis as leaky gums now. Same enzyme, but it is directly tied to our inflammatory response. So the higher that enzyme is, the more your immune system is activated.
Is brushing and swishing with some sort of mouthwash have any value in helping clean up the mouth and reduce the inflammation or the microbes in and of themselves? Are there other things that you recommend in general to help people reduce inflammation and heal their mouth health?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things. I will say first, the most important thing is to get a test because you need to see, what is going on in the state of the microbiome. Most people, when I do these tests, even if they think they're totally fine, I would say 85 out of 100 are going to come back with infection or dysbiosis in the mouth, even if they're not having symptoms. So I would say getting that test and then getting the necessary treatment at the dentist or hygienist is going to be critical first. And then once we get you healthy, then it's really easy for you to maintain this on your own at home by doing, proper hygiene methods. I always say you have to use an electric toothbrush. The reason for that is not that electric toothbrush are better than manual, but it's just that we're so distracted these days and we're all in such a rush that no one actually brushes properly and for the appropriate amount of time. So if you switch to an electric toothbrush, it's going to, stay on for 2 minutes. It's also going to buzz every time you need to switch areas in your mouth. So it's just a really good kind of fail-safe way of doing your oral hygiene. You must floss. We have 5 surfaces of our teeth, and our toothbrush doesn't hit 2 of them. So if you're only brushing, you're leaving 2 out of the 5 surfaces of your teeth dirty. And it's those 2 surfaces that are the most critical for maintaining oral systemic health and preventing gum disease. So those are the most important ones. I always tell people there's a joke in dentistry, only floss the teeth you want to keep, because brushing will eliminate cavities, and dentists can fix cavities for the most part, but we can't cure periodontal disease. So once you have it, we can't get rid of it. We can only put it in remission. So if you're going to do anything, or if you're going to skip one or the other, don't skip flossing. And then in terms of mouth rinsing, it's questionable whether or not it's actually effective. I will say that it, does rinse out some remaining debris that maybe your toothbrush doesn't get. Is it going to be super critical in terms of, maintaining your health? No. But there are some benefits. You could do some antibacterial, essential oils or something like that in the mouth rinse. But, we want to stay away from the typical traditional products that have, fluoride in them, SLS, sodium lauryl sulfate, some other chemical toxins. We want to use stuff that's natural and gentle. The goal, if it says kills 99.9% of the bacteria in the mouth, don't use it. That's actually going to be really bad for your microbiome. We don't want to wipe out the whole thing. What we want to do is disrupt the bad pathogens and support the good ones so that they can flourish and keep the bad ones in check. So that's really important. More than anything is the types of products that people use.
So so I guess one is, how often should we brush or floss or rinse?
Yeah.
And then what are some of the products you generally recommend in any of those areas?
Sure. You know, the standard, we say 2 minutes twice a day. I think that's just, the typical standard that we tell everyone. But, we got to take into account the patient's health, right? So if you have some sort of systemic condition, hypertension, high cholesterol, arthritis, gut issues, Crohn's, IBS, any of those things, you should probably be doing it 3 times a day, because that tells me that you have some sort of systemic inflammatory condition, which means that your gums are leaky and anything that's in the mouth is now getting into the rest of the body. So I would up the brushing game on patients like that. Or if your gums are bleeding or you're prone to gum infection or cavities, 3 times a day for sure. If you've never had a cavity, your gums are perfect, they've never bled, and a dentist has told you this, of course, maybe you could get by with 1. But I would say for sure, I would always say 2 twice a day, because what happens is a lot of people will, sometimes say, well, I'll skip the nighttime brushing. I'll brush in the morning to make everything fresh. The problem with that is, you built up all of this food and plaque all day. So after you eat, anything that's on your teeth, so any of the sugars, the carbohydrates that we consume, the bacteria love to eat that stuff, right? So they start to stick to the teeth, eat whatever we just ate, and then they start to form something called the plaque biofilm. So all day long, we're kind of growing these little interconnections, and the plaque biofilm is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. If you're getting in and disrupting that plaque every few hours by brushing your teeth, those bacteria really can't attach strong enough to start causing an issue. But if you leave them sit there for a long period of time and then you don't brush before you go to bed, now you're giving them the environment that they need to wreak havoc in your mouth and cause disease. Further than that, when we go to sleep, we stop producing saliva. And so our mouth gets really dry and our teeth get dry. And our saliva's job, one of them, is to coat our tissues and our teeth and keep bacteria from really sticking to our teeth. So don't skip your night brushing, because that's really setting you up for a whole host of issues if you don't brush before you go to bed. So really critical. And then in terms of products, I mean, there's so many good products out there. I'm not affiliated with any of these. I just want to say that. Tom's toothpaste is always great. You can get it pretty much everywhere. TheraBreath, same thing. I just bought a TheraBreath mouth rinse at Walmart the other day because I was cool that Walmart was carrying it. The Gum and Tooth Tonic brand is great. Risewell is great. Boca is great. Biocidin is great. Primal Health. There's all sorts of great companies out there. You just have to search for them. These aren't going to be the ones that, you get at CVS or Target or Walmart.
And when you address all these issues in the mouth, where does nutrition come in, and how open are our clients to nutritional changes?
I would say people are pretty open to them now. That was nutritional counseling was a pretty big part of our hygiene department in my practice. Because there's 365 days in the year, right? And patients will come and see me 2 or maybe 3 or max 4 times a year for their cleaning. So that's like if you were going to the gym 2 to 4 times a year and you're expecting to have a 6-pack, right? It doesn't work like that. So it's our job as healthcare providers to educate the patient as much as we can, because it's really up to them to do the work on their own to be well. And so a big piece of that is what people are eating. And I would say that our average knowledge about nutrition is not great, because we've been fed a lot of misinformation over the years. And so we spend a lot of time talking about anti-inflammatory diets, talking about whole foods versus processed foods, talking about staying away from foods that spike inflammation for patients, and then talking about supplementation as well. And I feel like people really found it helpful. How much they did it on their own, I'm not really sure. I had some people that really took it and ran with it. But I think you have to, give this information to patients several times before it starts to sink in and they make, changes, because behavior change, as you know, is so hard.
Weston Price certainly went around the world to look at nutrition and
Yes.
health and
Yes.
wellness,
Yes.
and just maybe chat a little bit about women's health and their nutritional status related to their mouth, obviously, and how it may tell you a little bit about the reproductive function and diseases that may go along with that.
Yeah, sure. So I'm not a nutrition expert, I'm a dentist. But what I will say is, when I have women come into my clinic and they're trying to optimize their fertility, a couple of things we're going to do. We're always going to do a microbiome test first. We want to see where they're at. There's oral probiotics, there's prebiotics and lozenges that we can give to patients, that we're always trying to eradicate the bad, replenish with the good, and then give them the tools that they can to maintain. But again, if we're trying to quiet the immune system, which is what we need to do, because when your body is on fire, which is inflammation, so if your body is inflamed, your mouth is inflamed, so little energy is actually going to the female reproductive system to reproduce, because the body says, like, whoa, we are not in a good optimum state right now to bring in and nourish another life. So we need to go and fight, infections or whatever we need to do before having this child. So we always look at the patient, as a whole being, trying to get their inflammation down. So we would tell people to stay away from things like gluten, processed dairy. If they were going to do dairy, we would always say, make sure it's grass-fed and organic. Same with meats. And then we would tell them to stay away from inflammatory foods, depending on if it bothered them or not, right? Like chickpeas, some people can do chickpeas, some people can't. And then we want to make sure that they were eating plenty of good fat. I think, when I was growing up too in the 80s and 90s, fat was so bad. We were like, don't eat fat. Fat is so bad for you. You're going to get fat if you eat fat. Instead, have some Wonder Bread with margarine on it and, put some sweet and low sugar on, or, fake sugar on it. Those are all things that are going to wreck your immune system and spike inflammation. So it's about re-educating to whole processed foods, or I'm sorry, not whole processed foods, but whole foods. We always tell people, eat on, buy your groceries on the perimeter of the grocery store, try and stay out of the center aisles. Mm-hmm. High quality, full fat foods are great to eat and really great for your fertility. And then we always recommend certain supplements for oral health. I think they have systemic health benefits too. But again, I try and stay in my lane as a dentist.
Oral health, ill health is on the rise in America, like all other diseases.
I say that again. Sorry, the first part cut out.
Our oral health is declining.
Totally. Isn't that wild?
And like cancer's on the rise, diabetes, hypertension, fertility issues on the rise, men and women. And what's your particular take on this? What are your thoughts and opinions of why?
Oh gosh, now I'm going to get on a soapbox.
We want you there.
I literally was just writing a blog right before this podcast about this. So I was just going and looking at some websites for the most common diseases in America, in the United States. And guess what was not on there?
Oral health.
Periodontal disease. So half of all Americans, which this is a really old statistic, this statistic's probably 10 years old, half of all Americans have gum disease. Over 65, it's like 70%. Yet in all of the websites I checked, the CDC, the Centers for Diseases and Aging, all these websites, not one listed periodontal disease. Dental caries or cavities is the #1 childhood disease in the world, and it's not listed anywhere. That's crazy that no one's looking at the mouth. And I think this just speaks to a bigger problem in our healthcare system, which is, we've stopped looking at people as whole beings, and instead we've become uber specialized and everyone focuses on their individual body part, which I think served us well for a long time, in that it got us to really understand how these certain body parts worked. But at no point in time has anyone come back to looking at the human being as a whole being. We've stayed very siloed. And one of those places that's siloed is the mouth. And there's so much research out there showing that the mouth is directly linked to all sorts of diseases. Like, 50% of all heart attacks and strokes are caused by oral bacteria. PG bacteria is the number 2 cause of Alzheimer's and dementia. Fertility, I mean, the list goes on. And I was a fertility patient myself for several years. I did 6 rounds of IVF. And so I've been through the process, and not once did one of my reproductive endocrinologists, who I was spending well over $250,000 with, ask me about my oral health. Not once. And yet there's so much research showing that if FN and PG get to the female reproductive system, it's going to impair ovulation, egg quality, implantation, causes stillbirths and miscarriage, decreases sperm count, motility, and morphology in men. And so when we're thinking, like, how do we optimize outcomes? Because we're asking people to pay so much money for healthcare. So even though, sorry, I'm still in my soapbox. Hope this is okay.
Keep going. We love this.
Since 2019, our lifespan has decreased. We are one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and our lifespan is decreasing. Not only is lifespan decreasing, but health span is decreasing. Health span meaning the quality of life. So we're not living longer, and we're not living any better, yet we spend more than any other country on healthcare. So we're not doing something right. And in my opinion, we're way too siloed. We're not working together, and we're not looking for root cause of disease. Instead, we're treating symptoms by giving medication when we should be trying to figure out where is this issue coming from. Most of the time, 9 out of 10 times, it's going to be caused by some sort of inflammatory issue down at the cellular level that's causing this disease. And if we can fix that, we can either prevent disease or halt it in its process, which is so much better for patients. But we're not looking across the aisle, if you will, to see how we can bring in other modalities of medicine to help our patients be well. All right. That was my soapbox. And it was just because I was just writing this blog 10 minutes ago.
What percentage of human beings do not have oral health issues? Cavities, gingivitis, gum disease?
I actually don't know that stat.
But most people have some oral ill health.
I would say
a cavity.
Something. I would say it's probably less than 5%.
Have nothing. Right?
That have nothing. Yeah, because usually if the really unhealthy people have gum issues and cavities. I'll see a lot of people in Africa, for example, like African descent, that don't have any cavities, but they have gum issues. And that's usually diet related. And then I'll see some people that have tons of cavities and no gum issues. And vice versa. But then there's other people that have airway. So, I'll have people that come in that have no cavities, no gum issues, but they've ground their teeth down to tiny little nubs. And usually that's an indication of some sort of airway health issue, like sleep apnea. So yeah, I would say it's probably less than 5% of people that don't have any dental issue. I mean, I'm trying to think off the top of my head in my practice.
Or even misalignment?
Yeah. Typically, alignment of teeth goes along with skeletal development. Skeletal development is really going to go along with airway issues. And so that's a big issue, right? Because in the past, when, our ancestors, they would eat really hard, fibrous, tough foods and meats. And, we always joke they would chew on sticks and animal bones and things like that. That was actually great for their jaw development and great for their tooth alignment. And that's why we had wisdom teeth, is because we needed all these big molars to chew this very nutritiously dense food. But over time, and with the invention of agriculture and farming, our diets have become softer and softer and softer and more processed and, filled with more sugar, that our jaws have gotten smaller and smaller. And there's tons of research on this, tons of publications on this. If you just Google like James Nestor, I think Price did a bunch of stuff on this too. Just talking about how over time our jaws have gotten smaller. And so that's why we don't have room for our wisdom teeth anymore. And we're extracting our wisdom teeth. And even some people don't have room for their premolars. So they have 8 teeth in their mouth that have been extracted because there's not enough room. That's nuts if you think about it.
My suspicion, as I've looked at Weston Price and many others, because evolutionarily speaking, were we plant eaters or animal eaters in our initial evolution? And we were likely animal eaters and not plant eaters. But over time, as the animals became less abundant and or it was more difficult for other reasons, or we found that we can consume some plants with the proper fermentation or soaking or cooking. Just wondering if that led to a much more uptick in the consumption of plants and the number of people that were growing because of a plant-based diet, and that wonder if plants because maybe the real culprit in all of this. And it's something that we know we likely evolved with mostly meat, but did we eat some plants, and which ones did we eat? But our diets today are rich in plants and typically low in animal fat. Dr. Rob Kiltz, another beautiful, spectacular day. And I just want to send thanks to all of those for watching the newest episode of Carnivore Conversations. Be sure to follow us on Spotify, Apple Music, and other streaming platforms to gain access to the full 1-hour episode. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more to come. God bless.